Chapter 43, Neurosis. Everything was quiet like being in medical stasis or like being completely alone. I wasn't sure how long I'd floated in unconsciousness. I'd come up for a gasp of pain every once in a while, but I didn't know how long it had been since I had really been here. A long time, certainly. I felt awake now, if somewhat disoriented. Most of my systems were on, but it was still dark and far too quiet. That, I was embarrassingly slow to realize, was because my screen and my audios were turned off. I turned them on to find I was in my room in Crescent's house. The gentle hum of my engine was the only sound, and the last thing I could consciously remember was taking that new medicine the medic had sent me. Oh Primus, my symbiotes, I sat up and was suddenly dizzy. My helm felt fragile, like bits of it would start to fall off if I wasn't careful, so I lay back down slowly. Something must have happened. Something, I couldn't remember. My processor ache was gone, and I couldn't hear anyone in the vicinity, which must mean Crescent wasn't here. I sat up again, more slowly this time. Something must have happened. I still felt too dizzy to get up off the berth, but I pulled my datapad out of subspace so I could send a message to Searchlight and ask him if Ravage and the others were all right. I had a message from him. Hey, Wave, when you're awake let me know, and we'll storm Crescent's house to come visit you. We miss you, your symbiotes won't stop asking when you're coming back. I think they're starting to think we're lying to them. We all thought you were going to die this time. Could you stop scaring us like that? See you soon. I lay down and rested for a bream, then held up the datapad to type a reply. I'm awake. Don't come storm Crescent's house, though. Please, I'm sure she's mad enough at me already. I'll see you soon. I would eventually need to get up and find Crescent, but she wasn't in the house right now, so I could wait. I lay there for 2 breams before Searchlight messaged me back. You sure? I took the datapad and thought about it. Yes. I can't even sit up without getting dizzy. Tell Ravage and the others that I'm okay, though, and I'll see them as soon as I can get to the school. I only had to wait a bream for Searchlight's reply. Okay. We will come see you, though. Maybe next dawn after school. Take care, mech. I turned off my screen again and tried to get some recharge. When Crescent came into the room, it was with my audios that I heard her. I couldn't read her processor. Curious, I sat up and tried to expand my range. After a few moments, I could hear her thoughts. So I could still read minds, but my default range, or at least my range, was smaller. Interesting. I wasn't going to complain about that. Soundwave? I guess you can't, Primus. I wonder if he can read minds at all anymore. I nodded. She frowned at me. I asked you a question. I hadn't heard it. My default range is tiny. Oh, that must be what happened. The medic really couldn't figure it out. All right. I had better get this over with. So, Crescent said. The files. Right. The medical files. Had she finally given in and let the medic look at them? What had happened? You know I have them and that I'm very good at not thinking about them. In fact, I did all I could to block them off in my processor. But now that medic's seen them, so you're going to find out anyway. What do you know about the incident where your creators died? I was shocked she was willing to talk to me about this. There was a swarm of scrapleets that somehow got into the house during the off cycle. My creators came out of recharge fast enough to seal off my room and call for help, but by the time anyone came, they were dead and I was badly hurt. Crescent nodded. They couldn't save you. You were going to die. There was quite a bit of processor damage, and some to your spark chamber as well. Your faceplate was almost entirely gone. Crescent replayed a memory in her processor of me before that, with my creators. You were a cute little thing once, believe it or not. There was a medic who was supposed to be able to work miracles, who could save mecha others consigned to the scrapyard. So I sent you to him, knowing that if anyone could bring you back, he could. And he did. His designation was Neurosis. Have you ever heard of him? I shook my helm. Well, shortly after you were back in my care, before I knew you could read minds, back when I was still looking for someone else to take you in, they found out Neurosis was doing illegal experimentation on his patients. I took you in to see if he'd done anything to you. The other medics did an analysis of your processor, that's what those files are, but they couldn't figure out what any of the anomalies there were for. It was clear you were an experiment, though. They wanted you. I should have let them have you. Under the pretense of sending you to a government-funded orphanage, they would have taken you away and continued to try to figure out what Neurosis had done. She smirked, and a touch of triumph lit her emotional core. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. I had hysterics and insisted that since you were my best friend Sparkling, I'd raise you on my own. I should have let them have you, but Embercrest's soft lining was too new a wound, and I wouldn't let the government take the last little piece of her I had from me to play games with. Of course, you don't even remember her. After the accident you were different. You used to be so talkative beforehand, so cheerful. You were the happiest Sparkling I had ever seen, and after you were just this faceless, emotionless freak. I hated you, Soundwave, and I still do. But I was stuck with you, because if I got rid of you after that, my friends would talk, and I'd be a disgrace. And I still didn't want the government to have you, for Ember's sake. Then I figured out you could hear my thoughts and that changed the game. Then I knew if I handed you over to the government, they'd figure out too. They'd use you. It makes my energon boil to think of any Sparkling of Embercrest's becoming a mindless, brainwashed tool for the government, even if you're hardly her Sparkling anymore. So I kept you and I kept you a secret, and most of the time I still wish I'd given you up back when I didn't understand what that would mean. And you ought to be slagging grateful to me, you little glitch, and more careful about who you tell. I don't trust your little friends. I worked hard to bury any records of you deep, and now they're surfacing because of this nonsense. Sorry, I said. You should be, Crescent told me. If it ever gets out, we are both going to be neck deep in scrap. I nodded. Good. You're supposed to rest for a Decairn. Then you can go back to school. Tell your friends I'm not letting them in this house, and I mean it, and if they show up, they can bang on the door until I come. The enforcers. Crescent stood and stepped out of my range. You know where the energon is, and if you absolutely need something, you'll be able to find me. Don't bother me unless you have to. She walked out the door and left me with my thoughts. I was a lab experiment. Well, that explained some things, but brought up a whole host of other questions. I was a lab experiment. A rogue medic had gotten his hands on me and made me into something else. Crescent had said I was different afterward. I held her memory of me as a Sparkling in my mind. I had been normal. And then I had been different. Was I even that Sparkling? How much had been changed? I had always known that I was unusual, but now I knew it wasn't just some fluke, something arbitrarily wrong with my processor. Someone had done this to me. How did you give someone the ability to read minds anyway? What else had that medic done? What else was different about me? Was I really safe? I had never felt so lucky that Crescent had taken me in. I understood better now why she was so afraid of me. I was an abomination, the product of an insane medic's experiments, a freak not of nature, but of science. The government had wanted me. Maybe they still did. Maybe they were still watching me. And they had good reason. For all they knew, I could be dangerous. I had systems and coding that even I didn't know about. I lay still for a long time, thinking, before my knee Flanagan forced me to get up and drag myself across the house to the kitchen. The orns passed quickly at first as I rested and spent most of the time recharging. The medic came a few times and made sure I was on the road to a full recovery. My range was so small I'd have to be standing right next to someone to hear their thoughts. But I felt deaf when I couldn't listen in on what the mecha around me were thinking, so I took to expanding it when there was someone else in the room with me. By the 8th orn, I felt ready to go back to school. It seemed like ages since I'd seen my symbiotes, and messaging back and forth with my friends was not the same as being there. They tried to come and see me a few times, but Crescent was true to her word and didn't let them in. I was going to be so far behind in classes. It would take a lot of hard work to catch up, but I was actually looking forward to it now that I could think clearly again. I wanted to get back to school. Finally the sun dawned on the 10th orn, and I left in the morning without talking to Crescent. She'd know where I'd gone and be glad I was out of her way. She'd probably be immensely relieved when I was finished with secondary school and had moved out entirely. I made the walk back to school. I wasn't quite ready to try flying yet. I was a little more tired than I thought I would be, but I'd let my range shrink, and so walking through the city wasn't much different from walking down a long, empty road or sitting in an empty car on the mass transit to Iacon. Iacon. I could go and study there now, I realized. By that time my range still wouldn't be bad enough to keep me from it. And if it got to be, I could always have the medic shrink it. Even though he didn't know what exactly he'd done, they had just experimented adjusting settings in my processor until they found something that stopped the problem. He would be able to do it again. I could also have another medic do it. I had picked up the specifics of it the last time he'd visited. For the first time, I could imagine a future for myself. I went back to thinking about those files. I'd have to tell the others. If past experience held true, Searchlight wouldn't care, and Breeze and Ratchet would just be curious and maybe a little concerned. Cable Reach was the most likely to be as horrified as I had been. He would understand all the implications, and he would be afraid. Part of me didn't want to tell him, but I knew I owed it to him. Not only had he kept my secret, he had helped me keep it and had been more than influential in convincing Crescent that she didn't need to find ways to silence my friends. I got to school just in time to go to my first class. After 2 classes, though, I was exhausted. Maybe I hadn't been quite as ready as I had thought. I decided to use it as an excuse to go to my room and see to my symbiotes. I stood outside the door for a bream and expanded my range. They were conversing quietly. Laserbeak was moping because it had been more than a decade since anyone had been able to communicate with her. Frenzy had figured out how to highlight text on a datapad, and he'd enlisted Rumble, who knew how to read, to help him go through my computer science textbook and highlight anything that could be taken out of context to mean something inappropriate. I was going to have to go through and get rid of all of that. I opened the door. They all looked up, expecting Searchlight, Breeze, or Ratchet. Soundwave. They stared at me, emotions an interesting mixture of disbelief, shock, and excitement. I came in and closed the door behind me before kneeling down. I missed you, I said quietly. Ravage leapt at me, crashing headfirst into me and nearly knocking me over. Don't ever do that again, don't you ever do that again. I thought you weren't coming back, even though Searchlight said you were okay. Laserbeak lighted on my helm and Rumble and Frenzy left off their highlighting to jump on me as well. We all sat, none of us talking, for a long time. They knew I could hear them. They didn't need to say anything, and I was so happy to see them that I didn't have words to express it. So we sat, piled together, for more than a jour. I had missed them so much. Are you going to classes? Frenzy asked when I finally got up. Please don't, please stay here. No, I said. I would wait until classes were over, and then go to Searchlight's room. I'd take the 4 of them with me, when I did. For now, I needed to message all my teachers and ask them to send me the homework and classwork I'd missed out on. I kept myself busy until after classes and then got up. Are you going to class? Frenzy asked again. No, I said. I'm taking you to Searchlight's room. We actually got there first. I let myself in and then sat and waited. My symbiotes took up their typical posts around the room. We only had to wait a bream before the others showed up. Searchlight was first. He froze in the doorway, staring at me, and Ratchet nearly crashed into him. Searchlight. Ratchet snapped. What the, Soundwave? I stood. Searchlight crossed the room in 3 steps and nearly crushed me in a hug. Ratchet followed, happy and relieved and actually smiling for once. Welcome back, Searchlight said, letting go of me. You fragging scared us. Again. Would you stop that? Well, I'm okay, I said. I know. Searchlight smiled. It's good to have you back. I sat down at the desk, but then Breeze came in and rushed over to hug me too, even more emotional than Searchlight had been. When I'd assured her I was all right, she backed off, beaming. Ratchet and I looked at each other. I'm not going to hug you, Ratchet said with a scowl. I shook my helm, nearly laughing, and sat down. Ratchet went over to his chair. All right, he said. Get off. Ravage looked up at him calmly. Make me. Ratchet dumped him out of the chair, and Ravage slunk away to plot his revenge. So, Searchlight said, what's the latest? I had sent him most of the information about my current condition, but I had warned him that I was keeping something back until we could talk about it in person. I found out why, well, I sort of found out why I can read minds. I explained what Crescent had told me, at least what she'd said about the medic who'd been experimenting on me. I had been right about their reaction. Searchlight was very firm in insisting it didn't matter. Breeze was interested and worried, and Ratchet was worried and slightly disturbed. If I had had this information a fortnight ago, I would have worried that they wouldn't want to be friends with me if I told them, but I no longer had doubts about that. The 4 of us were going to be friends for the rest of our lives. I was so lucky Searchlight had come across the bullies teasing me in the hallway so long ago. I was almost thankful to verdict. We spent the rest of the orn catching up. Ravage startled Ratchet, then tipped him out of his chair. Ratchet shouted and cursed and threw his wrench. I felt better than I had in Forns, but I was thoroughly exhausted by the time the lights out warning sounded and ready to go back to my room. It was hard to catch up on my schoolwork. The first several orns of class, I was completely lost. On top of that, dragging myself off the berth in the beginning of the on-site go was a struggle for the first Decaran. And it was 2 Decarans before I got up the courage to explain to Cable Reach that I was a lab experiment. As I predicted, he was horrified, but he got used to the idea after a while. So I was very busy, and I still had problems, but in a lot of ways, I felt like the hard things were past. I didn't have my own imminent inability to function hanging over my helm, which allowed me to focus on other things like getting good grades so I could go to the academy. I'd never actually believed I could do that, but now that my base range was manageable, things were different. I felt like I actually had a future. Friends, a future, and one more term of secondary school to finish.